Have you ever looked at your story idea or your plot outline and wondered where is the right place to start your story? Well, if you use the one simple technique that I'll share in this episode, you will never start your story too early or too late again. Now, this technique will work for any story and for a writer at any level of experience. And no, you don't have to be a plotter to use this technique either. So, let's get into today's episode. And if you find it helpful, I would really appreciate it if you would consider subscribing and clicking the notification bell. Welcome to Salome's Writer Therapy, where you and your writing connect. Before we talk about the technique, what should your story's beginning actually be and include? Your beginning, or the setup, is that moment or scene where you choose to introduce your reader to your story, and it should do the following. First, it should establish the setting. It should introduce the protagonist. It should establish the tone and mood. It should present the initial conflict or challenge, create questions, establish the normal world, and display your unique voice and style. Okay, so now that we know what needs to happen in your setup, what do I mean when I say you start your story too early or too late? If you start your story with a scene or scenes and delve into extensive details about all the elements that make up the beginning, you may be starting too early. And if you start your story with a scene where there isn't enough time before you get to the inciting incident to introduce all the necessary elements for the beginning, you are likely starting too late. So, to find the right place to start your story, you have to balance the information you include in your beginning with the timing, right? But how do you do that? Well, years ago, just when I started writing, I would look at all the elements I needed at the beginning of my story, that list that I gave you earlier, the setting, the protagonist, the conflict, questions, the normal world, etc. And then I would write a random scene that included them. Then I'd take days or weeks to struggle to create a pathway to the inciting incident and the rest of the story. Then I thought, what if I just start with the inciting incident? That would be so much easier, right? But then I realized there usually wasn't enough story time or page time to include all the elements needed to make a good beginning. I was so frustrated. It seemed like the simplest thing and I couldn't get it right. So I took some time to study different stories and to learn from successful authors. And things started to click. I could see how they balanced the information with the timing, but that was still in their stories. And that's when I created this technique to duplicate what I saw all those authors doing. And this technique has worked for me and my stories just as it will work for you and yours. Now, I've broken the technique into 3 very simple steps to make it a bit easier to explain it to you. So let's look at them. Step 1. Look at the inciting incident of your story and make a list of all the critical information your reader needs to know before they get to this point. Now, the key word here is critical. You only need to give your reader enough information to understand the impact and importance of the inciting incident. Everything else can come later. Now, keep in mind that this includes things like the genre, the tone, and the themes, etc. I'm not just talking about the setting, the characters, and plot. Because for your inciting incident to happen, your reader needs to understand all those other things as well. They need to understand what genre it is, they need to understand the tone, and they need to understand the theme, along with where is this story taking place, who the characters are, and what is actually going to happen in the story. Alright, step 2. Now, remember, as I said earlier, that your beginning or setup has to establish the setting to help readers visualize the world in which your story takes place. It also has to introduce the protagonist and give readers a sense of who they are. It should establish the tone and mood for your story, whether it's lighthearted, mysterious, suspenseful, or dark. You should create the mood that you want your readers to feel throughout the story. Your beginning should also present the initial conflict or challenge that your protagonist will face. This creates an immediate tension and gives readers a reason to keep reading. Now, just a note, this is not the inciting incident, but it is a conflict or a challenge that leads up to and is related to the inciting incident. Your beginning or your setup should also create questions or mysteries that need to be resolved, and it doesn't have to be stated outright. It can also be implied. This encourages readers to stay engaged and seek answers throughout the rest of the story. Your setup or your beginning should also establish the normal world or the protagonist's ordinary life before that disruption or inciting incident. This helps readers to understand the impact of the upcoming events. And finally, your setup or beginning should also display your unique voice and style that reflects the overall mood and theme of your story. Now, from these elements that make up the beginning, choose one piece for each of the elements that will provide that critical information from step 1 to include in your beginning or the setup. And finally, step 3, write the scene that logically leads up to the inciting incident, making sure to include the pieces that you've selected in step 2. And that's it. The key to remember, you want to give your reader just enough context to understand what's going on, but leave them with enough questions to keep reading. Now, just a quick pro tip. After you've written the scene, go back through it and add hints of other interesting pieces or events that will come later in your story if you've figured it out. If you're a pantser, you can do this step after you've done your first draft. This is known as foreshadowing, and it's a great tool to add anticipation and intrigue to that setup scene that you've written. And with that, you can now also start your story at the right place every time. But before I go, are you struggling to actually write your scenes? Well, I've got an episode just for you when I talk about how to write scenes. You can click on the screen or in the link in the description below to check it out now. Until next time, may your creativity flow freely and your fingers dance upon the keys. Keep writing with joy and stay connected. Cheers.